when I traveled to Edmonton, some brothers in Edmonton gave me copies of the clear Quran.
Wow.
And let me tell you what happened. A few months before that, I told my wife, this is in early November, I told my wife that I wanted to become a Muslim. And I'm not shaming my wife at all. She would say this publicly. I have nothing but wonderful things to tell you about her now. When I told my wife that I wanted to become a Muslim, my wife, who had been a devout Christian her whole life, she told me, Sean, I will never become a Muslim. And it hurt me a bit because not her words, but it made me think, if I become a Muslim, it might drive a wedge in my marriage. I'm 44. I've been with this woman since I was 15 years old. So I didn't want to do anything to jeopardize my marriage. A few weeks later, when I traveled to Edmonton, I shared with some men, including a local imam there in Edmonton, that I didn't know how to approach this with my wife. And the brother told me something that was so profound. He said, Sean, do not try to convince your wife to do this. He said, it's more likely that you will mess it up than anything else. He said, but I do want you to trust that Allah will guide her heart. When I got home from Edmonton, this is in early January, just not that long ago, I laid both of those copies of the Quran on my dresser, not because I was like low-key wanting my wife to find them. I just didn't want them to get bent up in my suitcase. And I was so exhausted from traveling that I went to bed like at 8 p.m. When I woke up almost 12 hours later, my wife had grabbed one of those copies. She's a professor, a doctor.
Yes.
She had already, through the night, she had already read almost half of the Quran.
Subhanallah.
And when I woke up, my wife said to me something that was so shocking. She said, Sean, I think we should become Muslims.
Wow. MashaAllah.
It was...
Round of applause. Go ahead. Bismillah.
It would be as shocking as you telling me in a few hours, Sean, I think I'm going to become a Christian. When I heard my wife say it, it sounds funny, but my first thought was, who is this woman and where is my wife? Who are you?
Who is this imposter in my bedroom?
Who is this person in my bed that looks like my wife and sounds like my wife, but now says she wants to become a Muslim? And there's a powerful lesson there. Like most Americans, most of what my wife knew about Islam, she learned from places that you don't want to learn about Islam. If what you know about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, you learned from the news, if you learned it from movies, if you learned it from social media, it will be misinformation. And my wife, who's an intellectual, a voracious reader, the first thing she said to me was, Sean, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he is not who I thought he was.
Wow.
And she was just moved by his life and his example. And she thought that to become Muslim, it meant you no longer had any reverence for Jesus. And I think most Christians think that.
Yes.
And it was actually quite the opposite. And when she saw that to be a Muslim still meant to have nothing but reverence and love for the Prophet Jesus, it changed her. And for the next 6 weeks, she and I were on a really beautiful private journey that we didn't talk about publicly, of just saying, what would it look like for us to make this big move in our lives? And so 3 weeks ago today, the Sunday before Ramadan, we took our Shahada, and it's been beautiful, man. For the past 6 months of this horrific genocide, I have been able to study up close, not just through videos. I have hundreds and hundreds of friends in Gaza, in the West Bank, and to see them experiencing what they're experiencing, you can't separate their survival from their faith. And I started seeing on October 8th, October 9th, October 10th, men and women in Gaza speak of how essential their faith was to them in the worst circumstances you could ever imagine. I started seeing men and women, fathers, mothers, grandparents, husbands, wives, children lose everything. I saw a video that haunted me. A woman, this was in just late October. This had only been going on for a couple of weeks. She had a garbage bag it was like a bloody garbage bag. And she said this was all that was left of her grandchildren. And in that moment, she was staring right at the camera and continued to speak about her faith and how if anyone who did this to her family thought it was going to cause her to lose faith, that they did not understand her faith. And I remember, I don't know her name, and I've never seen her since. I pray to Allah that she is still alive. I mean, I would love to tell her the impact that she had on me in that moment.
Wow.
But I saw that story over and over and over again. Palestinians in the single most dangerous place on the planet never curse Allah. They may say, why have leaders forsaken us? They may say, why are more people not helping us? But I never heard a single Palestinian say, why has Allah abandoned us? Instead, you will hear them say, in spite of what it looks like, we actually believe that this is the will of Allah for us. And it was confusing for me to see someone suffering, to see people suffering so much, but still maintain this faith. And I traveled to Dallas to do an event with Sheikh Omar in late November. And we went out and we had lunch, but we sat in his car for like 3 hours and talked. And I told him, I said, man, I don't know if what I'm feeling is that I want to be like Palestinians or that I want to be a Muslim. And he said, Sean, he said, what you don't understand is that what you're seeing that you love in Palestinians is Islam. He said, Sean, what you see there is their faith. And he said, the resilience you see, it may be particularly unique to Palestinians, but he said, you can't separate it from their faith. And that was a pivotal conversation for me where I said, out loud to him and to others, this is what I want. And in December and January and February, I was traveling in the UK and in Canada speaking, and all of the men that were a part of our team were young Muslim men. And I started to feel, so they would pray 5 times a day, and as they would pray, I would just watch. They would go to Jummah prayer and they would leave me in the car. And I started thinking, like, I'm not supposed to be in the car. I'm supposed to be with them.
Yep. 100%.
And it eventually got to the point where I told them after I think we may have been in Montreal, and I told them, like, I won't be in the car for any more times that you pray. I have to go with you. And so then I felt that it was urgent for me to make this change in my life. And so it's been beautiful. It's only been 3 weeks, but it feels like so much longer.